Let me ask you something, and I want you to really sit with this question for a moment before you rush past it. When the calendar turned, when that new year arrived with all its fresh pages and clean beginnings, did you feel it? That little surge of possibility? That quiet whisper that said, this time it's going to be different. Most people do. Almost everyone does, in fact. And yet, here's what's strange. Here's what's almost heartbreaking when you think about it. By the time February arrives, the vast majority of those people are living the exact same life they were living in October. The same frustrations, the same routines, the same quiet disappointments carried forward like old furniture, moved from one house into the next. Out of every 100 men and women who greet a new year with genuine hope, fewer than 5 will actually be living a meaningfully different life by year's end. 5. And that's not a criticism. That's not a judgment. That's simply what the numbers tell us, year after year, decade after decade. I spent a long time trying to understand why that is. For years, I read everything I could find on the subject. Philosophy, psychology, biography, theology, and slowly, gradually, the answer revealed itself. And it's so simple that when you first hear it, you might almost dismiss it. You might think, well, I already knew that. But knowing something and truly understanding it, living it, those are two entirely different things. Here is the truth. You cannot get a different year by wanting a different year. You can only get a different year by becoming a different person. Now, let me tell you something. That distinction, that small but enormous distinction, is the thing that separates the 5 from the 95. The 5 understand somewhere deep in their bones that the outside world is simply a reflection of the inside world. That circumstances don't create the man. The man creates the circumstances. George Bernard Shaw said it this way, and I've never forgotten it. He said that people are always blaming their circumstances for what they are, and that he didn't believe in circumstances. He said, the people who get on in this world are the people who get up and look for the circumstances they want. And if they can't find them, make them. Now think about that for a moment. Look for them. Or make them. Not wait for them. Not hope for them. Not wish for them when the calendar changes. Look for them, and if they aren't there, make them. But here's where it gets interesting, because most people hear something like that, and they think it's about action. They think Shaw is talking about effort, about hustle, about working harder or longer or smarter. And effort certainly matters. I'm not dismissing that for a moment. But that's not what Shaw was pointing to. He was pointing to something that comes before action. Something that makes action possible in the first place. He was pointing to the mind. Marcus Aurelius, a man who ruled the greatest empire on earth, a man who had every reason to believe that external power was the source of a man's life, wrote in his private journal, never meant to be read by anyone else, these words. A man's life is what his thoughts make of it, not what his circumstances make of it, not what his economy makes of it, not what his past makes of it. What his thoughts make of it. Ralph Waldo Emerson said essentially the same thing in a slightly different way. He said, a man is what he thinks about all day long, not what he achieves, not what he earns, not what he does, what he thinks. Because thinking, Emerson understood, is the root of everything else. The thought comes first, always. Without exception. I remember one time I was sitting in a small office, and a man I knew came in looking defeated. He'd had a rough year, and he was convinced that his luck had simply run out, that the world had moved on without him. And he sat across from me and he said, Earl, I just need things to change. And I asked him one question. I said, tell me, what do you spend most of your time thinking about? He paused, and then, slowly, he started listing the things that occupied his mind day after day. His debts, his regrets, the opportunities he'd missed, the people who had wronged him, the ways the world seemed stacked against a man like him. And I said, gently, because he was a good man, I said, do you see what you've been farming? He looked at me, puzzled, and I explained it this way. Think of your mind as a piece of land. Rich, fertile land with extraordinary potential. And you've been planting seeds in that land every single day. Every thought is a seed. The mind doesn't judge the seed. It doesn't say, "Are you sure you want to plant that?" It simply grows what you plant. It returns to you, in time, a harvest that matches the seeds you've sown. If a farmer plants thistle, he gets thistle. He doesn't get wheat because he hoped for wheat. He doesn't get corn because he would prefer corn. He gets exactly, precisely what he planted. And the mind works the same way. It has always worked the same way. It will always work the same way. That man had been planting worry, and he was harvesting anxiety. He had been planting resentment, and he was harvesting bitterness. He had been planting scarcity, and year after year, he was harvesting exactly that. And here's the key. Here's the thing I want you to really understand. He was a good man, a hardworking man, a man who genuinely wanted his life to be better. But he had never been told, or if he'd been told, he hadn't truly absorbed, that wanting and thinking are not the same thing. That wishing for a harvest while planting the wrong seeds doesn't work. It has never worked. Not for anyone. Now, William James was one of the most important thinkers America has ever produced. William James said that the greatest discovery of his generation was that human beings can alter their lives by altering their attitudes. He called it the greatest discovery. Not the telephone, not electricity. The fact that a man or woman can choose what grows in the garden of their mind. Choose it, deliberately, consciously, every day. And this is where we arrive at what I believe is the single most important question you can ask yourself as a new year unfolds. Not what do I want to achieve this year, but who do I need to become? Those are very different questions. The first question focuses on the harvest. The second question focuses on the seed. And the man or woman who focuses on the seed, on becoming, will inevitably produce the harvest. But the man who focuses only on the harvest, while neglecting to examine and change the seeds he's planting, will repeat the same year he's already lived. Perhaps with a different set of circumstances on the surface, but the same year underneath. There's an old image I've always loved. A ship leaving harbor. You can see it from the dock. It's moving. It has power. It's making progress. But if that ship has no clear destination, no fixed point it's sailing toward, it will wander. The currents will take it. The winds will shape its path. And it will end up somewhere. It always ends up somewhere. But whether it ends up somewhere worth being, that depends entirely on whether the captain knew, when he left harbor, exactly where he intended to go. Most people leave the harbor of a new year with tremendous energy and very little direction. They know what they want to escape. They can tell you exactly what they're sailing away from. The debt, the stress, the stagnation. But ask them where they're sailing to, and the answer grows vague. And a ship sailing away from something without a clear destination will, sooner or later, find itself in the same waters it was trying to leave. The 5%, the ones who actually transform, they know where they're going. And more than that, they know what kind of captain they need to be to get there. They've thought about it. They've written it down. They've held it in their minds with the kind of steady, calm, persistent focus that makes it real before it's real. In the 9th chapter of Mark, there is a passage that has stayed with me for decades. All things are possible to him that believeth. Now, some people read that, and they hear it as a religious promise. And perhaps it is. But I hear it as something else entirely. I hear it as a description of a law, a natural universal law. That belief, genuine, deep, habitual belief, changes the landscape of what a man will attempt, and therefore what a man will achieve. You cannot consistently act in a way that contradicts your deepest beliefs about yourself. It's simply not possible. The man who believes, at his core, that he is unlucky will find evidence for it everywhere he looks. And the man who believes, at his core, that he is capable, that he is moving forward, that he is becoming someone worth becoming, he will find evidence for that everywhere he looks. The world, remarkably, tends to confirm what we already believe. So becoming a different man or a different woman isn't a matter of discipline alone. It isn't a matter of willpower, though those things have their place. It's a matter of thought. It's a matter of what you plant in the extraordinary fertile soil of your mind, day after day, morning after morning, in the quiet moments before the world starts pulling at you. I want to tell you something I've come to believe with everything in me. After decades of studying this subject, after reading hundreds of books and talking to thousands of people, the inner change always precedes the outer change. Always. The man who is waiting for his life to improve before he starts thinking better is like the man standing in front of a cold stove and saying, "Give me heat, and then I'll add wood." It doesn't work that way. It has never worked that way. You add the wood first. You change the thinking first. And then the heat, the results, the circumstances, the life you're hoping for, that follows. Something is wrong. And most people can feel it. Even if they can't quite name it, there's a quiet unease that settles in around midlife for a great many people. A sense that the life being lived and the life that was imagined somewhere back down the road, those two things don't quite match. The gap between them isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It simply sits there like a low hum in a room you've grown so accustomed to that you've stopped noticing it. But it's there. And deep down, you know it's there. And the most unsettling part? You've tried. You've genuinely tried. You've set the goals. You've made the plans. You've started the year with real intention more times than you can count. And yet here you are, and the harvest looks remarkably similar to every harvest before it. So you pause, and you wonder, and the wondering sits heavy. Here's what I want to tell you, and I want you to stay with me for just a moment, because this is important. The harvest is not the problem. The harvest is never the problem. The harvest is simply the truth. It is the most honest thing in your life because it doesn't flatter you and it doesn't deceive you. It shows you with quiet precision exactly what has been planted, not what you wished for, not what you intended, what was actually placed in the soil, day after day, season after season, in the unguarded hours of your ordinary mind. A farmer doesn't stand at the edge of his field in autumn and argue with what's growing there. He knows, because the law of the harvest is absolute, that the field returns what was sown, always, without exception, without sentiment. And your mind is that field. Every thought you've given your attention to, the recurring worry, the old resentment, the low-grade belief that things probably won't work out the way you hope, those were seeds. You planted them, most of the time, without realizing you were planting anything at all. That's the part nobody tells you. You don't have to plant deliberately for the planting to happen. The mind is always receiving, always growing something. The only question, the question that changes everything, is whether you are choosing what gets planted or simply letting the wind decide. William James, the great Harvard philosopher and psychologist, told us that human beings can alter their lives by altering their attitudes of mind, not their circumstances, not their connections or their resources or their timing, their attitudes of mind, the thinking itself. And here is where something opens up, because if the harvest comes from the seed, and it always does, then a man who begins today to plant differently will in time grow differently. The field doesn't hold grudges. The soil doesn't remember last season with bitterness. It simply grows what you give it. And you can begin giving it something new, quietly, deliberately, starting right now. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with how hard you've worked. You know the kind I mean. You've been busy, genuinely busy. The days have been full of effort, full of obligation, full of motion. And yet when you sit quietly at the end of another year and take honest stock of where you are, something doesn't add up. The energy was real. The hours were real. But the destination you imagined when you started, somehow you're no closer to it. Maybe you're not even sure anymore exactly what that destination was. And that uncertainty, that creeping sense that all this motion may not be taking you anywhere that truly matters, that is one of the heaviest things a person can carry. You've been moving, but have you been arriving? Now stay with me here, because I want to share something that took me a long time to fully understand. And once I understood it, I couldn't unsee it. Think about a ship leaving harbor. It's a powerful image. There's the engine, the crew, the fuel, everything necessary for an impressive voyage. The ship pulls away from the dock with tremendous capability. And from the shore, it looks purposeful. It looks like it knows exactly where it's going. But here is what nobody on the shore can see. Whether or not the captain has fixed a destination in the navigation charts before casting off. Because a ship without a destination doesn't drift lazily. It moves. It moves with confidence and speed and all the appearance of progress. Right up until it doesn't. Right up until the currents have quietly shaped its path into something the captain never chose. And the tragic part, the part that should stop us cold, is that the ship will still end up somewhere. It always does. The ocean doesn't leave ships suspended in the middle of nowhere. It delivers them. But where they're delivered depends entirely on who was steering and toward what. Most people, I've come to believe, are running their lives like a ship that left harbor without a fixed point on the chart. They know what they're sailing away from. The stress, the stagnation, the sense that time is moving faster than their progress. They can describe their discontent with perfect clarity, but ask them to describe with equal clarity the person they intend to become by the time they reach the other shore. And something shifts. The language grows softer. The edges blur. And that blurring, that gentle vagueness about who we are becoming, is where the years go. Marcus Aurelius, a man who navigated the most turbulent waters of empire with remarkable steadiness, understood this completely. He knew that a man governed from within by a clear sense of what he stood for and where he was heading could not be meaningfully thrown off course by what happened around him. The destination wasn't a place. It was a person. And that is the captain worth becoming, the one who sets the course before leaving the harbor, not somewhere out at sea, hoping the stars cooperate. You can set that course today. Quietly, deliberately, one honest decision about who you are becoming. That single decision changes everything that follows. Here is a number that should trouble every thinking person. 5. Out of every 100 men and women who begin a new year with genuine hope, who feel that quiet surge of possibility when the calendar turns, only 5 will be living a meaningfully different life by the time that year closes. 5 will have actually moved, actually changed, actually closed the gap between the life they're living and the life they know. Somewhere deep down, they are capable of living. The other 95 will have tried, most of them sincerely. They will have made the promises, bought the journals, set the alarms 30 minutes earlier, told themselves, and perhaps a few others, that this time would be different. And by spring, sometimes sooner, the old patterns will have quietly reasserted themselves. Like a river that's been briefly redirected, finding its way back to its original bed. And here is what disturbs me most about that number. The 95 are not lazy people. They are not unintelligent people. They are not people without dreams or without the capacity for something greater. In fact, some of the most talented, most earnest, most hardworking people I have ever encountered belong to that 95. And that should give us all pause. Because if effort alone were the answer, if sincerity alone were enough, the numbers would look very different. So sit with that for a moment. Just sit with it honestly. Now, here is what I have come to understand after decades of studying this question. After reading the biographies of men and women who genuinely transformed their lives, and comparing them carefully against the far larger group who never quite did. The difference is not talent. It is not timing. It is not luck, though people on both sides of that line will talk about luck endlessly. The difference, the single, quiet, consistent difference, is what each group does with the hours nobody sees. The private hours, the thinking hours, the hours between obligations when the mind is left to its own devices. The 5% are not smarter, but they are more deliberate about one thing. They guard their thinking the way a careful farmer guards his soil. They understand, not as a motivational idea, but as a working practical truth, that the mind grows whatever is consistently planted in it. And so they plant deliberately. They choose every day what they will give their sustained attention to. Emerson told us that a man is what he thinks about all day long, not what he achieves, not what he earns, what he thinks. The 5% have taken Emerson seriously. The 95, for all their effort and good intention, have largely left their thinking to chance. And here is where something genuinely hopeful opens up. Because belonging to the 5% is not a matter of birth or brilliance or circumstance. It is a matter of decision. One quiet, private, uncommonly serious decision to stop leaving your thinking unattended. You can make that decision today. And the moment you do, truly do, you have already begun to cross from one group into the other. There is a trap that catches the brightest people most completely. Not the careless ones, not the indifferent ones, the bright ones, the thoughtful ones, the men and women who genuinely care about living well, who read, who reflect, who have enough self-awareness to recognize that something in their life needs to change. These are precisely the people most vulnerable to this particular trap. And the reason it catches them so effectively is that it looks, on the surface, entirely reasonable. It sounds like this. When things improve, I'll feel better about myself. When the numbers look better, I'll start thinking more confidently. When the situation stabilizes, then I'll bring my best thinking to it. When, always when. Always this quiet postponement of the inner work until the outer circumstances seem to justify it. And the years pass inside that, when I've watched it happen to good people more times than I care to count. Men and women of real ability, real depth, real potential, circling the same frustrations year after year, not because they lacked intelligence or effort or desire, but because they had the sequence backwards. They were standing in front of a cold stove, arms folded, patience thinning, and saying, "Give me heat, and then I'll add the wood." And the stove, as stoves always do, waited. Now here is what I want you to understand. And I want you to understand it not as a clever metaphor, but as a working law, as reliable and as impersonal as the law of gravity. The heat never comes first. It cannot come first. That is not how the law works. The wood goes in first, the effort of building the fire, the deliberate, unglamorous, unrewarded in the moment act of adding the fuel, that comes before the warmth, always before. Not simultaneously, not shortly after. Before, and in the life of a human being, the wood is the thinking, not the discipline, though discipline matters, not the strategy, though strategy has its place. The thinking, the settled, chosen, deliberately cultivated set of beliefs a person carries about who they are and what they are capable of. That is the fuel. And every result, every achievement, every transformation, every meaningful change in outward circumstance is simply the heat that follows from the fire that was built first, quietly, in the mind. William James spent a lifetime studying this law and arrived at a conclusion he called the greatest discovery of his generation. That human beings, ordinary human beings, not saints or geniuses, can alter their lives simply by altering their attitudes of mind. Simply. Not easily, perhaps, but simply. One thought chosen over another. One belief tended instead of abandoned. One morning after another of adding the wood before asking for the heat, Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire from this understanding. He wrote that a man's life is what his thoughts make of it. not what his efforts make of it, not what his advantages make of it, his thoughts. And here is where something shifts, because you don't need the circumstances to change before you begin. You never did. The circumstances were always waiting on you, on the quality of thinking you were willing to bring to them, on the fire you were willing to build, before the room felt warm enough to deserve it. Add the wood first. Today, in this quiet moment, before the world makes its demands, the heat will come. It always comes, but only after the wood goes in. There is something that happens to a person after enough years of trying. A quiet calcification, a slow, almost imperceptible hardening. Not of the heart exactly, but of the hope. You don't become cynical all at once. It happens gradually, the way a river smooths a stone. One disappointment at a time. One resolution that didn't hold. One fresh start that somehow circled back to the same familiar place. And eventually, without ever making a conscious decision about it, a person stops expecting the new thing to actually be new. They go through the motions because the motions are at least familiar, but somewhere underneath, they've stopped truly believing that anything is going to be fundamentally different. And that quiet disbelief, that nearly invisible surrender, is the most expensive thing a human being can carry, because it costs them everything that hasn't happened yet. Now I want you to stay with me here, because what I'm about to share is not a new idea. It is, in fact, one of the oldest ideas in human wisdom. But old doesn't mean exhausted. Sometimes old means proven. Sometimes old means that every generation that has ignored it has paid the same price, and every generation that has lived by it has reaped the same reward. Here is the truth that took me years to fully absorb. Every system fails eventually. Every strategy runs out of steam. Every habit framework, every productivity method, every carefully constructed plan for a better life, all of it eventually collapses back to one thing. And that one thing is the identity of the person running the system, the mind behind the method. Because you can hand two people the identical strategy, the identical tools, the identical opportunity, and one will transform it into something remarkable, and the other will gradually drift back to exactly where they started. Not because one worked harder, but because one had done the deeper work first. Emerson understood this with extraordinary clarity. He wrote that what lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us. Within. Not the calendar, not the economy, not the new program or the new city or the new relationship. What lies within. Because the within always, always shapes the without. The inner world is the architect. The outer world is simply the building. And Scripture speaks to this directly in a way that has stayed with me for decades. In the book of Mark, we are told that all things are possible to him that believeth, not to him that hustles, not to him that plans, to him that believeth, because belief, genuine, settled, habitual belief about who you are and what is possible for you, that is the foundation everything else is built upon. Change the foundation, and the entire structure of a life can shift. This is where something extraordinary becomes available to you, because the mind is not fixed. It is not concrete. It is, as William James assured us, something a human being can deliberately alter, starting not next year, not next month, but today. In this hour, in the next quiet moment you give yourself. You don't need a new plan nearly as much as you need a new picture of yourself. Carry that picture. Tend it. Believe it before the evidence arrives. That is where every new life has always, without exception, begun. Now, I know what some of you may be thinking right now. You may be thinking, this sounds wonderful, Earl, but my situation is genuinely difficult. My challenges are real, and I want to be very clear. I'm not dismissing the reality of difficulty. Real hardship exists. Real obstacles exist. I know that. You know that. But I also know this. Two people can face the identical set of circumstances, and one will be broken by them, and the other will be built by them. And the difference, the only difference that ultimately matters, is what each of them is thinking, what each of them believes is possible, what seeds each of them is planting in the soil of their mind while the storm is still raging. The circumstances don't decide it. The thinking decides it. So here is my quiet challenge to you. Not a resolution, not a list of goals. One simple, specific thing. Starting today, just today, set aside 10 minutes in the morning, before the emails, before the news, before the noise of the world comes rushing in. Sit quietly and ask yourself one question. Who am I becoming? Not what do I want, not what do I need, who am I becoming? Write something down, even a sentence, even 3 words. Describe the person you intend to be by the time this year is done. And then, tomorrow morning, do it again. And the morning after that, hold that image, plant that seed, water it with your attention and your belief. Do that for 30 days, just 30 days. And I promise you, not as a slogan, not as a sales pitch, but as a man who has seen this work again and again, your life will begin to move. Not because the world changed, but because you began to change. And the world, as it always does, will follow. A different year does not arrive on the calendar. It begins in the quiet of a man's mind, in the seeds he chooses, deliberately and faithfully, to plant.